I grew up the golden child and my siblings suffered for it. I tried to fix it but my brother pushed me away then left our family and it didn't end well. Hey, everyone. I just turned 18, and I've been carrying this story for as long as I can remember. I think I need to let it out, not just to help myself, but maybe someone else reading this, too. I'm the youngest of two boys. It's just me and my older brother, Sam. He's 2 years older, and growing up, I always felt lucky to have him around. But as far back as I can remember, there was a difference in how my parents treated us. I was the golden child. I got the hugs, the gifts, the attention. If I spilled juice on the carpet, they'd laugh it off. But if Sam did the same thing, he'd get yelled at. Birthdays were always about me. I got the best presents, and my brother often got afterthoughts, or nothing at all. It took me a while to notice what was happening. I was too young to understand, but Sam wasn't. He saw it all. At first, he just seemed sad, quietly playing with whatever toys he had. But as we got older, that sadness turned to anger. I think it's because kids don't really know how to make sense of unfairness. They just feel it, and it builds up. By the time I was 5, I started seeing it myself. One Christmas, I got a huge box of action figures while Sam got a book about math. I felt terrible. I remember sneaking one of my toys into his room, thinking maybe that would make him smile. At first, he was so happy, his face lit up in a way I didn't see often. But when my parents found out, everything went south. They accused Sam of stealing my toy, grounded him, and told me I needed to stop letting him take advantage of me. I cried, trying to explain that I gave it to him, but they wouldn't listen. That was the first time I saw the cracks forming between us. Sam started pulling away. It wasn't overnight, but bit by bit, he became more closed off, angry, distant. I kept trying to fix it in the only way I knew how. I'd share my snacks or slip him a little money from my allowance. But every time, it just made things worse. My parents would see it as Sam manipulating me, and he'd get punished again. It wasn't just my parents, though. Sam started resenting me, too. And I get it, when you're a kid, it's hard to understand who's really to blame. I was the easy target because I was always there, always getting what he didn't. By the time he was a teenager, the fighting started. Sam and my parents argued constantly. He'd call them out, saying things like, "Why do you only care about him?" or "What did I do wrong?" Their response? They'd dismiss him, telling him to stop being ungrateful. Looking back, I think those years were when Sam decided he couldn't rely on our family anymore. But I didn't know that then. I still thought I could fix it. As Sam grew older, the distance between him and my parents only grew. By the time he was 14, it felt like every conversation in our house turned into a fight. Sam would call them out on their favoritism, asking why I got everything handed to me while he was barely acknowledged. "Why do you love him more than me?" he shouted once during an argument that I can still hear in my head. My mom's response: "Stop being so dramatic. If you focused on improving yourself instead of complaining, maybe we'd have something to be proud of." That was their go-to tactic, dismissing him, telling him he was overreacting, acting like his feelings didn't matter. I'd sit in my room, hugging my knees to my chest, feeling powerless. I wanted to help, but what could I do? When Sam wasn't arguing with our parents, he was avoiding them. He'd leave the house as much as possible, often staying out late with friends or just wandering the neighborhood. I'd wait for him to come home, hoping he'd talk to me. But when he did, he'd brush me off. "Why do you even care?" he said once when I tried to ask if he was okay. "You're part of the problem, whether you see it or not." That one stung. I didn't blame him, though. How could I? From his perspective, I was the golden child, the reason he was overlooked, dismissed, and punished. At the same time, I started noticing that Sam was changing. He was always angry, sure, but beneath that was something worse: exhaustion. It was like the constant fighting had drained something out of him, leaving him hollow. When he was 16, he started working odd jobs, mowing lawns, bagging groceries, anything he could do to make a little money. I thought it was just a teenager wanting more independence, but now I realize he was preparing to leave. One night, I overheard him on the phone with a friend. He said something that stuck with me: "I just need to hold on until I'm 17. Once I've got enough saved, I'm out of here." Hearing those words felt like a punch to the gut. I knew Sam was unhappy, but I didn't realize he was planning to leave for good. The day he left is one I'll never forget. He packed his things and slipped out in the middle of the night. No goodbye, no explanation, just an empty room where my brother used to be. When I found out the next morning, I begged my parents to reach out to him, to bring him back. But they didn't care. "He made his choice," my dad said, barely looking up from his coffee. "If he doesn't want to be part of this family, that's on him." I couldn't accept that. I got his address from one of his friends and started visiting him after school. I thought maybe, now that he was out of the house, we could rebuild our relationship. But Sam wouldn't let me in. Sometimes, he wouldn't even answer the door. Other times, he'd tell me he was too busy or just didn't want to see me. I didn't understand it back then, but now I think I do. He wasn't shutting me out because he hated me, he was trying to protect me. Sam had seen how quickly our parents could turn on someone, and I think he was afraid they'd start treating me like they treated him. Even though he kept me at a distance, I didn't give up. I kept trying to show him I cared, even if he couldn't see it at the time. But no amount of love for me could undo the years of damage my parents had done. What happened next proved that. I'll explain in the next part. But for now, I just want to say this: if someone you love is pulling away, don't stop reaching out. Sometimes, just knowing someone cares can make all the difference. A few months after Sam moved out, our parents hit a financial crisis. My dad had gambled away a significant amount of money, leaving the family scrambling to cover debts. They were desperate and, of course, turned to Sam for help. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us," Mom said over the phone one evening. I didn't know they'd been calling him until I overheard their angry conversations. When Sam refused, things got ugly fast. My mom started spreading her version of events to anyone who would listen, painting Sam as the villain. She told relatives he was heartless, selfish, and abandoning the family when we needed him most. "He owes us," she'd say, conveniently leaving out the years of neglect and mistreatment. I wanted to believe Sam would ignore them, block their calls, and move on. But part of me knew that wasn't who he was. No matter how much he'd been hurt, I think a small part of him still hoped for their approval, even if he didn't show it. The harassment escalated. Mom would send long, guilt-tripping texts filled with accusations, and Dad left angry voicemails demanding Sam man up and help the family. The pressure was relentless. I tried to talk to my parents, to make them stop. "You're just pushing him further away," I told them, but they wouldn't listen. To them, Sam was an ungrateful problem they needed to fix, not a son they had failed. One afternoon, I decided to visit Sam again. I hadn't seen him in weeks, and something told me I needed to check on him. As I walked up to his apartment building, I saw them, police cars and an ambulance parked outside. My stomach dropped. I ran up the stairs, hoping it was nothing, just a mistake. But when I got to his door, the reality hit me. Sam was gone. He'd taken his own life. The room felt like it was spinning as I sat down on the floor, trying to process what I was seeing. A police officer handed me a note they'd found. It was from Sam. The first part was addressed to our parents. He wrote about years of feeling unloved, unwanted, and overlooked. He wrote about how their words and actions had broken him in ways they couldn't even comprehend. But then he wrote about me. "I didn't hate you. I just tried to keep you away so they wouldn't hate you, too. I don't know where their hatred for me came from, but I never blamed you. Please don't blame yourself." I broke down reading those words. All the times he'd pushed me away, I thought he was angry with me. But now I understood, he was trying to protect me. He didn't want me to experience the same rejection and pain he had endured. Sam left everything to me, his small savings, his apartment, his business. But none of it mattered. All I wanted was my brother back. In the days that followed Sam's death, I felt like I was walking through a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. His apartment was quiet and empty, but everywhere I looked, there were reminders of him: his worn-out sneakers by the door, the books on his desk, even a half-finished to-do list on the fridge. The hardest part was reading his note again, trying to process what he had written. He hadn't hated me. He had kept me at a distance because he wanted to protect me. That thought broke me all over again. He had carried so much pain, and yet even in his darkest moments, he was thinking about me. When I showed the note to my parents, I hoped it would make them realize what they had done. I wanted them to see how their years of neglect and cruelty had driven Sam to this point. But instead, they deflected. "This isn't our fault," Mom said coldly, wiping at her eyes like the tears were an inconvenience. "He made his own choices. He was weak," Dad added, shaking his head. "Life is hard for everyone, but he gave up." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even in death, they refused to acknowledge the role they'd played. Their denial made me feel like I was losing Sam all over again, like his story would be erased or twisted into something it wasn't. I decided I couldn't stay in that house anymore. I packed my things and moved out within the month, using some of the money Sam had left me to rent a small apartment. It wasn't about the money, I didn't want it, but I knew Sam would have wanted me to use it to get away. I also started therapy. At first, I didn't know what to say. How do you even begin to talk about something like this? But over time, my therapist helped me see that I wasn't responsible for what happened to Sam. I had spent so many years blaming myself, thinking I hadn't done enough to help him. But she helped me understand that the pain he carried was too big for any one person to fix. What hurt the most was realizing how much he had tried to stay strong, even when he felt like he couldn't anymore. In his apartment, I found scraps of his plans, notes about expanding his small business, lists of things he wanted to save up for, even sketches for a dream home he had wanted to build one day. He had tried so hard to hold on to hope, even when the world felt against him. I decided I needed to honor his memory, to make sure his story didn't end in silence. I reached out to some of the people Sam had been closest to, friends, co-workers, people who had known the side of him that wasn't defined by our parents. Together, we shared stories about him, laughed about the good times, and mourned the loss of someone who had been so much more than the pain he carried. I'll admit, the grief doesn't go away. I still miss him every day, and some mornings, I wake up feeling like the weight of it all is too much. But I also know that Sam wouldn't want me to live in that darkness. He'd want me to keep going, to build a life worth living. In the weeks after Sam's funeral, I struggled to find my footing. The grief was overwhelming, but so was the anger at my parents for how they had treated him, at myself for not doing more, and at the world for letting things turn out this way. I didn't know how to move forward. What kept me going were the memories of who Sam truly was beneath all the pain. He wasn't just the angry, distant brother who left home. He was the kid who used to help me with my homework, the teen who taught himself how to fix bikes so we could ride together, and the man who, despite everything, always tried to protect me. I decided I needed to honor that version of Sam, the one who had dreams, who wanted to build a life away from the chaos of our family. The first step was creating some distance from my parents. I didn't cut them off entirely, but I limited my contact. Every time I saw them, they tried to rewrite the narrative of Sam's life, making it seem like his struggles were his own fault. I couldn't stand to hear it anymore. Instead, I threw myself into therapy and work. Therapy gave me the tools to process my grief and recognize the ways I had been shaped by growing up in such a toxic household. It also helped me realize that I couldn't control how my parents remembered Sam, but I could control how I did. With Sam's business and savings, I decided to do something he would have been proud of. He had always talked about how important it was to help others who felt trapped or forgotten, so I used part of the money to start a small fund for mental health resources in our community. It wasn't much at first, just enough to provide a few people with free counseling sessions, but it felt like a step in the right direction. I also reached out to the friends Sam had left behind. They told me stories I hadn't heard before, about how he helped a coworker through a tough time, or how he stayed late to help someone meet a deadline. It reminded me that even though he felt isolated within our family, he had made an impact on the people around him. One of his closest friends told me something that stuck with me. Sam always talked about you, you know. He said he didn't want you to go through what he did. He was proud of you. Hearing that brought me to tears. I'd spent so long feeling like I had failed him, like I hadn't done enough. But knowing he still thought of me that way, that he believed in me, gave me the strength to keep going. The fund grew slowly but surely. I partnered with local organizations and started sharing Sam's story in small community events. It was hard to talk about, but every time someone told me they felt seen or understood because of it, I knew I was doing the right thing. As time passed, the pain of losing Sam didn't go away, but it began to feel different. Therapy taught me that grief isn't something you ever truly get over. Instead, you learn to carry it in a way that doesn't overwhelm you. For me, that meant taking what Sam had gone through and turning it into something meaningful. The fund I started in his name became a bigger part of my life. At first, it was just a small initiative, paying for counseling sessions or connecting people with resources. But over time, I started to see how much it was needed. People reached out, sharing their own stories of struggling with mental health or feeling trapped in toxic family dynamics. Hearing these stories was bittersweet. On one hand, it was heartbreaking to know so many others had faced pain similar to Sam's. On the other, it gave me hope that his story could make a difference. Every time someone told me that the fund had helped them or that they finally sought therapy because of Sam's story, I felt like I was keeping a piece of him alive. My parents, of course, wanted nothing to do with it. They continued to paint Sam's death as a tragic failure, rather than a result of their neglect. They didn't acknowledge the fund or the work I was doing. At first, that hurt. I wanted them to understand, to feel the weight of what they had done. But eventually, I let go of that need. Therapy helped me realize that their denial wasn't my responsibility. I couldn't force them to change, and I couldn't make them see the truth if they weren't willing. What I could do was focus on my own healing, and on honoring Sam in my own way. One day, while going through some of Sam's old things, I found a notebook tucked away in a box of his belongings. It was filled with sketches, ideas, and plans he had for his future. He had dreamed of starting a larger business, of buying a house, of traveling to places he'd only seen in pictures. Seeing those plans made me emotional, but it also gave me direction. Sam had so much he wanted to accomplish, and even though he wasn't here to do it himself, I could carry some of those dreams forward. I decided to expand the fund's mission, focusing not just on mental health, but also on supporting young people who, like Sam, were trying to escape toxic situations and build better lives. I worked with local charities to create scholarships and job training programs, hoping to give others the opportunities my brother didn't have. The work became my way of healing. Every time I spoke about Sam, I felt closer to him. Every time the fund helped someone, I felt like a piece of his legacy was living on. But healing wasn't just about action, it was also about acceptance. I had to learn to forgive myself for not being able to save Sam, to let go of the guilt that had weighed on me for so long. It wasn't easy, but slowly, I started to believe what my therapist had been telling me all along. I did everything I could, and Sam would want me to move forward, not live in the shadow of what happened. As I continued running the fund in Sam's memory, I realized I needed to focus on myself, too. For years, my life had revolved around grief and guilt, but I knew Sam wouldn't have wanted me to stop living because of him. I started small, leaning on friends, opening up more, and reconnecting with old hobbies. I picked up drawing again, something I hadn't done in years. It became a way to process my emotions, especially the memories of Sam. Little by little, I set new goals for myself, reaching out to friends, exploring new places, even taking a class to learn something new. Slowly, I began to rebuild a version of myself that felt whole again, not defined solely by loss. I also began sharing Sam's story more widely. I spoke at schools and community centers about mental health and the importance of asking for help. Each time someone told me the story helped them, I felt like I was keeping Sam's legacy alive. Rebuilding myself wasn't easy, but with time, I began to find a sense of peace, both with Sam's memory and with the life I was creating. The grief didn't disappear, but it softened, becoming a part of me instead of something that consumed me. The fund in Sam's name continued to grow, helping more people than I ever thought possible. It felt good to know that his story was making a difference. Every message of thanks or story of someone finding help reminded me that Sam's life, though cut short, had meaning that continued to ripple outward. I also stopped chasing something I had held onto for too long, my parents' acknowledgement. For years, I wanted them to see the harm they'd caused, to understand what they'd done to Sam. But I came to realize that their denial was something I couldn't change. Instead of focusing on their reactions, I poured my energy into the people and things that truly mattered. One of those things was my own healing. I worked on forgiving myself for what I couldn't do, understanding that Sam's struggles were far bigger than what I could have fixed. I realized that while I couldn't save him, I could honor him by living a life he would have been proud of. Part of that was learning to let joy back in. I began celebrating the small victories, finishing a drawing, making someone laugh, even just waking up and feeling okay. These moments became reminders that life is worth living, even after loss. Sam's note stayed with me throughout this journey. His words, "I never blamed you. Please don't blame yourself," became a mantra I repeated on the hardest days. They reminded me to keep going, to forgive myself, and to honor his memory in a way that let me move forward. Years have passed since I lost Sam, but not a day goes by that I don't think about him. The grief doesn't overwhelm me anymore, it's quieter now, like a shadow that's always there but no longer blocks out the light. The fund in Sam's name has grown into something far bigger than I ever imagined. It has provided counseling, scholarships, and hope to countless people. Knowing that his story has helped others find strength reminds me of the impact he still has on the world. It's how I carry him with me every day. I've also built a life I think he'd be proud of. I've surrounded myself with people who love and support me, and I've worked hard to focus on my own growth. I've learned to celebrate my successes and forgive my stumbles, knowing that healing isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Looking back, I can see how much Sam shaped who I am. His struggles taught me the importance of compassion, of standing up for others, and of never taking love for granted. In a way, his legacy lives on not just through the fund, but through me. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that we can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we move forward. Losing Sam will always be the hardest thing I've ever faced, but it's also given me a purpose I never expected, to make sure no one else feels as alone as he did. So, if you're reading this and you're struggling, please know this, you matter. Your story matters. There is help out there, and there are people who care. It's okay to reach out, to take that first step, and to believe that things can get better. Sam didn't get to see the future he deserved, but I carry him with me as I live mine. And I'll keep carrying him, every step of the way.